Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yakker. My guest today is UFO blogger, journalist, researcher, and author Cheryl Costa. We'll be yakking about the updated version of her UFO Sightings Desk Reference book that was written with Linda Miller Costa. Cheryl Costa, welcome again to Paranormal Yakker.
Thank you for having me.
The last time you were my guest, Cheryl, we yacked about your book, The UFO Beat, the New York Skies column, July 2013 to June 2019, and the UFO Sightings Desk Reference, United States of America, 2001 to 2015. Since then, you've updated the UFO Desk Reference to take us up to 2020. What motivated you to update the book?
We actually started working on it during the lockdown in 2019. We had to wait till we had 2020 numbers to complete it. We were exploring a couple of different ideas of a reference book and some specialty book. We were looking at doing the amount of data that we have. If we put it all in one book, it would be like about a foot thick. It'd be like 2 Oxford dictionaries. Okay, about 6,800 pages. Nobody's going to buy that. We were looking at the idea of publishing 50 individual state books with just their data in it. We were also looking at publishing 29 of the 33 UFO shapes in their own book, one shape, one book, all the detail. We realized a couple of things. This is horrid. First thing, 3.5% of the people who made entries, both the National UFO Reporting Center and MUFON, didn't tell us what city they were in. Then the other thing is 14% of the data between both databases, they spelled the name of their city wrong, or they would say, Rochester, New York, next to Joe's Bar or something like that, something you couldn't sort on. It was horrid. We were running tests back during the March and April lockdown 2020. We made a decision that we would correct that. We knew it was going to be labor intensive. So we sat down with a golden mail list, merged it into a copy of the database. I used to work at Lockheed Martin. This was like going back to work at Lockheed Martin. I was putting in 6.5 8-hour days, 5 days a week. And I did this from middle of August of 2020, right up to the first week of January in 2021. It was an 850-hour effort to do this, but the data is cleaned up. Now we can generate lists we can do it by zip code. We can do it by latitude and longitude. We can do it by city locations. The zip code stuff is telling us amazing stuff because you get these clusters that you don't see just by calling out a city.
In the updated version of the UFO Desk Reference, you present data and analysis for 167,632 sighting reports of UFOs reported by individuals during the first 20 years of the 21st century.
Right.
That's a staggering figure. I'd be amiss, Cheryl, if I didn't ask you, did you get any sleep at all while updating the book?
Okay, the actual update, the putting together the new book, I started the second week of January 2021. Everybody kept asking me, when's it going to be out? And I was saying like June, maybe July. This is a testament to good project management skills. We had developed some techniques. When we did the original book, we sat, like everybody else, we sat down in a word processor, chapter 1, and started just going through it. It took forever. As I was developing charts and graphs and tables and things like this, or narrative, I would write up the article, we'd edit it and all that stuff, spell check the whole thing, and then we'd just burn it into a PDF. And when we got all done with all the charts, graphs, and all this stuff, and the narratives and everything, we had them all printed out into PDF. I printed some of them out, went down to the local blueprint place and ran them off, and I had them clipped together. Linda took a week's vacation, so we had a weekend, and a weekend between. So we had about 12 days. I would lay them out on the floor or out on the bed or on the dining room table, that type of thing. And she said, okay, she'd look at it. She's the editor publisher. So she said, we're going to publish this part first, this part second, this one in the back of the book. When we actually went to assemble the book, it was like assembling kids' blocks. We just kept stacking them up in a subdirectory and we put it in Adobe Acrobat. The whole book was assembled. And once we got it in Adobe Acrobat, we just went ahead and assigned pages and put the copyright headers. So it only took us 750 hours, where the first book took us something close to 2,000 hours to just do. It wasn't that mind-boggling. I was doing something maybe 3 or 4 days a week, putting it together. I mean, technically I'm a housewife too, so I'm running around doing my normal chores and things like this. We got it all done and we delivered it by the 1st of May. That's what we were really proud of. People, like right up to April, people were George Knapp out in Las Vegas was saying, when are you going to publish it in May? And I kept saying, oh, maybe about the third or fourth week. I didn't know for sure until we got it put together. And it wasn't so much I didn't have the information, it's so much Linda hadn't touched it yet and said, this is what we're going to do. And she is the publisher. So I had to bow to her. Once we did all that, it took us about 2 hours, load it all up to Amazon, fix a couple of other things, and that was it. So we're really quite pumped in our publishing process now. If we want to do these 50 individual state books and 29 individual shapes books, we've got a process now. We know exactly how to build it. We know exactly what kinds of charts to generate, what order to put them in, burn them in a PDF. Over the next 18 months, now we're going to take a 3 or 4 month break because we're moving out of state. We're moving to a different state. After that, once we get unpacked and get set up again, we're going to be going, Linda will be full-time retired. She's going to be full-time retired when we leave here. When we get to our new location, we're going to have a very large project table. We're just going to start cranking out the state books and shapes books. As we get each state done, we're just going to start cranking them out. Now, they'll all be available on Amazon. In fact, Amazon's not sharing us with any other bookseller. They're holding us exclusive right now, which is kind of interesting.
Traditionally, UFO research focused on field investigations and physical analysis and evaluation. You and Linda broke the mold, in a sense, and applied the methods of statistical analysis to the study of UFO sighting reports. When did you realize there was a need for what you did and decided to follow through with it?
I used to be a UFO journalist. I wrote a column for 7 years. People think writing a newspaper column, oh, that must be fun. You know, what it amounts to is it's a 400-word term paper every week is what it amounts to. And if you remember high school and writing term papers, you get the idea of the fear. There were many, my deadline was on Thursday night, and there were many Wednesday night. I was sweating blood. I had nothing. And Linda would say, well, you haven't looked at thus and such. And hey, wow, that's a great idea. Start writing it. So what happened was I had to have something to write about every week. I was doing sighting stories, things like this. I started looking at New York State counties with New Fork data and occasionally with MUFON data, if I could get my hands on it. And I was adding up where the hot spots were in New York State. People would tell you where they would say, oh, the Hudson Valley or up in Lake Erie. But to be honest with you, yeah, those are hot spots, but there were many others that we didn't know about and that were actually more prominent. And if you listen to all the rhetoric, they will tell you, oh yeah, the ground zero for UFOs is the Hudson Valley. It turned out to be Suffolk County, Long Island. Isn't that where Montauk Point is? The idea of working the statistics was important. Well, what ultimately happened was in the summer of 2015, I worked really hard and I did all the stats for New York State alone. New York State was my beat, New York State newspaper. And I did the stats, and we were showing the stats we had for New York State only to a bunch of the old timer former MUFON directors here in the States, former MUFON field investigators, guys that were retired. And we were showing our stuff and they're going, wait a minute. We didn't remember we added county data to the material that wasn't in either database. Or if it was like in MUFON, it was there. It was dependent upon the person making the sighting. And if they didn't know where they were and they didn't fill out the city, they certainly didn't tell you the county. We put it in. And what happened was these guys were looking at this stuff. We didn't know there was a cluster there. We didn't know there was a cluster there either. In one case, everybody used to say, well, Lake Erie has the Lake Erie effect. There's all kinds of stuff there in Lake Erie and the Niagara Frontier. We found out that Monroe County, or essentially Rochester, New York, has almost as many sightings, which raised the question, my golly, is there a Lake Ontario effect? And we did a little research. And do you know there are colonial era stories, not from the US side, but from the Canadian side, that says and suggests that there's a underground city under Lake Ontario. It's been ancient city underneath Lake Ontario. It just added to the mystery. Move ahead. We get up to about October of 2015, and Linda and I were sitting in our favorite pub looking over a couple of pints with each other. We got talking about, we found all this cool data with New York that nobody knew, and all these patterns nobody knew about. And we said, wow, that's cool. Look at what we discovered. Wow, what would happen if we did the whole country? And then we just sat there and stared at each other for about 20 minutes saying, how long is this going to take? We figured it'd take a year. It took 18 months. It was a lot of work. And in those days, we did not know what we were doing. Things like clean up the data, sanitize the data. You have to always do that. The process we used to clean up MUFON data was radically different than what you used to do National UFO Reporting Center data. They were different. And then to make them compatible with each other, we had to change fields and things like this. What took us 2 months to do back in 2016, I can do in 2 or 3 days now. Something that took took 3 months to do back in those days, I can do in a week now because we know how to do it. We got a written procedure. Remember, the first rule, Linda and I used to be government contract. I worked for Lockheed. She worked for a company who supplied research librarians to government library facilities. She was the head librarian to the Environmental Protection Agency's toxicology library in downtown DC for 15 years. Smart lady. By the way, she's got all the science degrees. Me, I've got the arts and entertainment degree with the top hat and the cane, but I've got the analysis background. Stuff we do now as defense when we were in contracting. The first rule of government contracting is do as little work as possible. So what you do is if you learn how to do something, write a really good process procedure for it. And then the next time you do it, refine that process procedure even more. The third time you got to do it, it's really easy to do because you know exactly what to do, what stuff to get. That's what we did. We developed a very serious process procedure, which evolved over the 5 years between the first book and this book. It kept evolving and getting tighter and tighter. So that's why I was able to do this 2020 book. In fact, I worked on it almost completely by myself until Linda came along and did the editing and did the organizing of it over about a 12-day period. We put this book together in 750 hours versus almost 2,000 hours in 2016. That's a testament to good process procedure writing and good project management. We're really proud of that.
UFO Desk Reference covers sightings in all 50 U.S. states plus the District of Columbia. Which states did you find had the highest number of UFO sightings?
Since about 2010, California, Florida, and Texas in that order consistently. California number 1, Florida number 2, Texas number 3. Back 2001 to about 2009, Washington State was in there, mixed up in there a bit. The way it works is California, Florida, Texas, and then the next 7 states are typically in the top 10. Once in a while, one of them will drop out to be number 11. Something else will pop in. But for the most part, the next 7 states play musical chairs every time we do this. A couple of years ago, New York State was number 6 in the country. I think in the first book, we're now number 5. Washington State was a little lower, but Washington State was number 4 this time. I'll give you an idea. California had in 2001 to 2020 had 21,013 sightings. Florida had 11,000. Texas had 9,400. So you get the scale. New York State had 7,100, and so did Washington State and change. I just rounded out. But that gives you an idea. The one weird inconsistency is Arizona has consistently been number 7 last 8 years. And considering that Phoenix is right now, Phoenix is the number 1 city in the country for sightings. Los Angeles County is the number 1 county, not the city, but the county is the number 1 county in the country with more sightings than 39 individual states by itself. Maricopa County, which is where Phoenix is, the Phoenix Lights, all that stuff, has more sightings than 36 individual states by itself.
Did you notice in your findings if there was any commonality regarding the UFO sightings, such as the time of day or season they were seen, or the circumstances in which they were seen, such as being in their car, looking out a window in their house, or just sitting and relaxing in their backyard?
Most people will assume it's always driven by population. Yes and no, but for the most part, yeah, you can say if you go to a major metropolitan area, you have more sightings there. In our first book, we found out that temperate weather was a driver. What that means is this: if you're in a northern state like the New England states, Michigan, Washington State, there's a quiescent amount of sightings January through about May, and from about October, December, November, December, a quiescent amount of sightings. Around June, it starts to tick up. July and August are through the roof, and it trims off a little bit going into leaf season in September, and then it falls off to that quiescent amount of sighting. I thought it was like that every place. The summertime, people are outside. Linda discovered when she was putting the book together, she looked over her terminal one Saturday and said, "Hey, did you notice there's a latitude difference with the monthlies?" In fact, I had other UFO researchers tell us that plotting the UFOs by month was stupid. They think, oh, why do we need that? We don't need that. Well, we kept it anyway. And it turned out to be a major indicator. If you're in a middle state, we'll say like Virginia, and go across the country, that peak starts coming down and these other quiescent levels come up. Get to a deep south state like Texas, Florida, Georgia. It's statistically flat, usually with a dip in the summer because it's so bloody hot. Nobody's outside looking at UFOs. Now, that was in the first book. We knew that, and we suspected leisure time was also an issue, but we didn't have a way to prove it. In the new book, we've discovered what the drivers are. We have 5 drivers. We have 5 influencers. Okay, not every state has all the influencers. Population is driver. Temperate weather is a driver. Leisure time is definitely a driver. Hours of darkness is a driver because we are were finally able to come up with an algorithm to plot the hours of darkness. And what's weird about that is, I know you got people in the audience say, but I had a sighting in the daytime. 68 to 75% of the sightings are between 5 o'clock in the afternoon and 11:30 at night, with the peak of it being between 8:30 and 10:30 at night. About bedtime, taking the dog out for the last walk, having a smoke, something like that. Okay. People coming home from Bible study, whatever. An evening activity, you're outside, you have the opportunity to see the sky. The other 25 or so percent of the sightings covering the last from 1 o'clock in the morning to about 4:30 in the afternoon represents the other 16 hours of the day. It was remarkable. We didn't know this. A lot of people did not know this. They were stunned. For all the, what I'm going to call the debunkers and the people who say, it's all random noise, Cheryl. Every single state is consistent with that chart. For something that doesn't exist or is random noise, it's got a very consistent pattern. Now, the only place that pattern kind of falls apart, the bottom 2 or 3 states, South Dakota, Delaware, South Dakota, and North Dakota, we had so few data points, only a few hundred data points. The chart is a little rickety, but it's a little rickety that follows the pattern of what the rest of them are like. The other driver, and this is going to sound weird, observer access to broadband. If you can't easily report it, then it doesn't get reported. And we found out that rural areas that have crappy broadband or no broadband at all, they can't report them as much. And we found this to be rural states and heavy farming states. And this is why like the president and everybody's saying we need to do a TVA program to have broadband brought out to the urban areas. If they get a good plan out there and start really funding broadband out into the rural areas, we're going to see the real estate of UFO sightings in the rural states and Midwest states take off. I'll give you one more example of that. I was on a radio program back after the first book came out. Some of the charts I generated, I really didn't look at really seriously. I just got them done because we were doing the book. And I had this thing laying open. We were on a commercial break and I glanced down and I noticed that all the states that were touching the Great Lakes had the sightings in the many thousands. Moved 2 states away and it was in the low hundreds. And then I realized those states were typically agricultural states. Then there's the secondary influencers. And this is the really weird stuff that gives you chills sometimes. Proximity to large bodies of water. And a lot of people kind of knew that one, kind of like population. People say, hey, there's USOs. We see them a lot by the beach. This I got from my colleague, Thomas W. Conwell. He's another New York State researcher. He took our data and did research by putting maps and big pins on his wall. Proximity to toxic ecosystems. He says the UFOs hang around our dead mining towns, our dead gas fields, our dead oil fields, dead strip mines, heavily polluted lakes, heavily polluted rivers. They seem very interested. And if you talk to the experiencer community, they say, hey, ET told us to take care of our planet. They seem very interested in how we're wasting things. Proximity to geological fault lines. They seem to haunt the areas that are unstable geological fault lines. High visibility media reports. Now, this was originally discovered by Project Blue Book, and we were able to take something from Project Blue Book and then make a comparison. They said if something was reported in a newspaper, there was always lots of follow-on reports right after it. But what we discovered was it wasn't necessarily the modern version of this. Was not like, okay, there was a report today about somebody had a sighting. Suddenly everybody had to get in on the action. And actually what it amounted to is a lot of people learned where they could report it, usually in the newspaper report. For the large part, for the last 50 years, since the Condon report in 68, newspapers haven't been reporting UFO sightings. In Indiana in 2008, there was a major cluster in April of 2008. And in the week following that, there was a bunch of smaller articles in local papers that never made it to national papers, but they were in the local papers. And what we discovered with those follow-on reports were people were logging sightings, National UFO Reporting Center, but it was like, I didn't know I could report it here. And there was also the idea, I didn't have a sighting yesterday, but I had one 6 months ago. And so there was a lot of retro reporting. That was a driver or an influencer. And the last influencer is a thing called the generational effect. Again, we don't have a direct proof that this is happening, but we've observed this in areas that have had traditionally large amounts of sightings. Los Angeles, for instance, they've had things flying up and down those valleys since the 1880s. I've seen copies of newspaper reports from that era reporting bright lights flying up and down the canyons out there. And then there was the Battle of LA in 1942. And so you get this thing where Grandpa told us all these great stories about the Battle of LA. So it filters down through the generation. And the attitude is maybe if I look up regularly, I'll see something special. And we see this also also with Phoenix, Maricopa County, from the Phoenix Lights 20 some odd years ago. Mom and Dad told us about the Phoenix Lights. Maybe if we look up, we'll see some. And that's kind of what the generational effect is.
Have you connected with any UFO researchers in other countries? And if you did, do they find the same increase in UFO sightings in their countries as you found in the US?
Canada, Chris Rosenskowski up in Manitoba. He is pretty much my counterpart up there. He's a professor at some college, but he does the number tracking like we do. And he said their numbers are through the roof up there as well. You know what's funny about this? Remember I told you there's this 8-year cycle? In 2017, I was at a MUFON conference. I had a booth. It wasn't a sales booth, but we had a computer there. We had a small inkjet printer. If you told us your state and county, we would give you a 1-page dump of what the sightings were for the first 15 years or first 18 years. And I was talking with a very senior investigator, and he said, well, I don't know why you're doing this. The numbers have fallen into the toilet. And I said, yeah, but it seems, and everybody was saying, oh, they went home because they're sick of us. Oh, Space Force chased them away. And I heard all these knee-jerk answers why the numbers are falling off. But I kept trying to tell everybody, this is a natural cycle, guys. I'll be back in a year or two. Trust me. But there was one thing. While all the sightings were hitting bottom, there were 3 shapes that were on the increase. And I pointed out to this one investigator, you'd recognize the name if I told you, but I can't say it right now. If this one shape shows up, these other 2 show up in frequency. So it was like one ship was the mothership and these others were like support ships. And they were there in equal quantities, except for what we would call the service ships, where like the egg-shaped ship there was a lot of them, like they're scout ships. And then there was like a shuttle ship, and that was a teardrop shape. In 1986, a Japan airliner coming in from Japan over to Alaska encountered a Saturn-shaped ship. It's not really Saturn-shaped. It's kind of shaped like an acorn. The little part that comes off on the side from the big sphere part of it was the width of 2 747s. The whole ship itself was a half a mile wide. It had the agility, or better agility, than the 747. The pilot had a heck of a time keeping out of its way because it kept flying in front of him. Well, we seem to think that might be a mothership, and these teardrop shapes and egg-shaped ships seem to be support craft, a shuttle ship and maybe a scout ship, and they come back in equal quantities. So during the couple of years when everybody else was falling into the dirt, they were on a very steep increase. From the Saturn-shaped ships at that time had been only about 30 or 40 sightings a year. Suddenly they're up in the low hundreds to 200 in that range. Suddenly there are that many of them being seen.
For decades, the government, the press, and the media have either ignored or ridiculed anyone who mentioned UFOs. However, with scientists, military personnel, and academics now coming forward about the existence of UFOs, it's becoming more difficult for them to do that. That must give you a good feeling because you've been part of all of this coming out.
It does give me a good feeling, except the Condon people basically said there's nothing to these UFOs. We don't need to spend money on them. And there's always true believers. You can pat them on the head, the poor deluded people. And then there was a very heavy campaign by secret forces in our government, working with academia, working with the press to belittle those of us who are doing UFOs. It's all imaginary, nothing to see here. These aren't the droids you want. Though a lot of people can continue to start studying this stuff. When I began writing my column, we noticed some things, and I went to my editors and said, somebody's messing with us. They said, what do you mean? Every time I report a story, and not all of the stories had this kind of information, Susie and her dad went to the custard ice cream stand to get an ice cream cone, and they saw 3 bright objects flying saucers fly over, followed by fighter jets. You couldn't find the article on Google unless you knew to look at our newspaper. It was noticed by people out of the state and out of the country. Wait till we got, and I said this to my editors, and they said, nah, you're imagining things. And the second time it happened, my digital editor comes to me and says, is somebody sitting on us? And he says, I'm getting complaints. Where was last week's article? I said, posted where it always is on the newspaper. Third time around, again, we mentioned the military's interaction with these things. You couldn't find it. A guy by the name of Dirk, who runs UFO Digest up in Canada, he observed this as well. So I gave him permission. I said, every Friday, don't Google us. Look at our article. If you Google us and find out that the article's not displayed, just take a copy of the article directly from the newspaper's page and post it up there. That's how we got around it. These days, for the last 5 years, if I'm on some major talk radio program, if I get into certain numbers, certain places, funny, my phone suddenly doesn't work. funny. My internet goes completely dead. This is not my imagination. We've got a logbook going on this stuff. Yes, there are people messing with trying to keep this information suppressed. And it has been going on for 50 years. And it's time for the truth embargo to stop. This stuff is real. And, I get a lot of people saying to me, Cheryl, with all this Navy stuff here, maybe your tinfoil head isn't as tin as we thought. And they're apologizing to me and all this.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to order your books, Cheryl, what is the best way for them to do that? And if they want to get in touch with you, what is your contact information?
If you want to order the book, the only place you can get it right now is online with Amazon. So you go to Amazon, go into the area for books, and just type in Cheryl Costa. Cheryl with a C, Costa with a C. The first thing you should pop up is the white book, the UFO Sightings Desk Reference from 2017. You'll see the UFO Beat, which is all my columns for 7 years. And then this nice big pink book. Make sure I tell you what the pink book is. This nice big pink book, which is the 2001 to 2020, and it is robust. It is robust. Charts, graphs, tables, analysis of what we discovered by measuring the UFO phenomena. Instead of doing a case study on one thing, we studied the overall anthill. Now, the reason it's pink, back in 2019, 2020, we suspected there were going to be congressional hearings about now. A bunch of people who were on the inside track in Washington. In fact, we were aware of Senator Rubio's bill before he got it into the COVID bill as a writer. Somebody came to me, a very notable insider came to me and says, Cheryl, you and Linda have published the only statistics in 50 years since Blue Book. And he says, well, if they have congressional hearings and if they don't just call pilots and former military intelligence spooks, you're the only people who know the numbers. You could get called before Congress. So Linda and I had this idea, said, okay, if two old gay ladies are sitting testifying before Congress, by golly, if they're thumbing through our book, we want everybody to know it's our book. So we made it bright pink, so bright you can fly in an aircraft with it.
Cheryl Costa, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. I wish you success with your books and send the best of the best to you and Linda.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us on.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. To be sure you don't miss any interviews on my free YouTube channel, all you have to do is press the subscribe button on your screen.